Hello, welcome to the debate on Sky News. I'm Martin Stanford. Here's our take on developments brought together from America, the UK and around the world. The frosty handshake at the United Nations General Assembly. Can they work together to fight ISIS and bring peace to the Middle East?
My oh my, what a wonderful day.
Boehner resigns as Speaker. Is Congress heading for a new dawn? And is government still on the verge of shutdown? It's the annual gathering of world leaders, the United Nations General Assembly. What have we seen? An icy handshake between Obama and Putin. Faltering progress on dealing with Islamic State. Ambitious targets for the Sustainable Development Goals. And agreeing on a transparent process for appointing a new UN Secretary General. In a moment, we'll be speaking to Natalie Samarasinghe, the Executive Director of the United Nations Association. But as usual, with me are the Democratic commentator Geoffrey Robinson, standing by in New York, and Conservative commentator Armstrong Williams is in Washington. Gentlemen, I wonder if you fancy this job of UN Secretary General. There are 7 billion souls on planet Earth, I'm told. Just one gets to lead the UN. Geoffrey, do you fancy it?
No, it probably means getting up early in the morning, getting dressed, shaved, bathed, and going out. I'm an author. I live in my pajamas, kind of like Hugh Hefner, with certain variations, of course. No, it's a thankless job. I don't know why anybody would take it. Because in the end, you can't really accomplish that much. You are stymied at every turn by everybody's special interest. 192 nations have their own special interests, want to see their things go their way, and the poor Secretary General can only add up his tally of failures. There are very few successes.
Armstrong, would you fancy the job, or would you recommend anyone for it?
Listen, we all should heed the clarion call when we're called upon to serve, especially an austere body like the United Nations. And while I am certainly one of his harshest critics, while Geoffrey may use a soundbite to call it a thankless job, there's a lot of good that they do. It's only the controversy, it's only the conflict that is often reported. I mean, thousands and millions of people around the world have been impacted and helped through the humanitarian programs. I mean, through leadership, through sacrifice, and through discipline. I think most of us who knows anything about leadership and knows the kind of role and the kind of impact you could have on the world and the governing bodies would be honored for the opportunity to serve in the role to leave our blueprint to at least make a difference in the world. And differences are not judged by the political ramifications and by the conflict between the hundreds and hundreds of world leaders that you have to negotiate with. It's the things that you often overlook. It's how it impact everyday lives on the ground who are just in their fight for survival.
Well, one of the things that you have to try and negotiate is these new sustainable development goals. Natalie Samarasinghe is Executive Director of the United Nations Association, and she joins us today. Tell us about these goals, because they follow on from the Millennium Development Goals, many of which were never attained by many countries. So what's the point of it all?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that the Millennium Development Goals did make a lot of progress and a real difference for millions of people. The goals on extreme poverty, on access to primary school education, on reducing child mortality, on reducing the prevalence of malaria, HIV/AIDS and TB, increasing access to sanitation. Real progress was made in all of those areas. You're right, we didn't achieve everything. The areas where we didn't get as much progress as we wanted to, such as maternal mortality, gender equality, those are areas that require a broader social transformation, and the UN is very good at delivering something that is targeted, where it has support. When it comes to these broader transformations, you need political will. These goals, new goals, are really different because they are goals for everyone. It's a universal framework that applies to every single country in terms of achieving the goals and in making them happen. It's not just a diktat from rich countries to poor countries saying this is what you should be doing. It's a global agenda. And I think the really big difference is it's not just looking at eradicating extreme poverty. We are the first generation that has it in its gift to do so. But it's saying that you can't do that if we don't also address climate change, if we don't also build peaceful societies around the world that respect human rights.
What about the money, Natalie? How are we going to pay for all this?
So when you actually look at some of the estimates over the sort of 15 years where the goals are supposed to be achieved, we're looking at sort of, people say $500 billion, $1.5 trillion. I mean, that pales in comparison with what we spend every single year on military expenditure. It pales in comparison to annual fossil fuel subsidies. So the money is there. It's about prioritizing it and putting it to where it's actually needed. And it needs to be a partnership between states, the private sector, civil society, philanthropists. We all need to be looking at raising money in different ways, strengthening tax systems, closing loopholes. There's a lot of different people who need to act to make this happen, but we can do it.
Let's bring in Jeffrey and Armstrong. Armstrong, America famously rarely pays its UN bill, or they always seem to pay it very late. Do you think they're going to find funding for these new goals?
Listen, America is definitely committed to humanitarian relief, uplifting, and no different than what we saw with the spread of Ebola, the health crisis, the poverty, even getting decent water running in these communities, something that we take for granted in this country. I think the real point is that you have a lot of people who are part of this body who still embrace terrorism and give cover to people who are involved in this kind of terrorism and things that destroys humanity and not uplift humanity. And a lot of these things become very political because while you want their voices as part of the United Nations, so you can gather this information, you can gather these thoughts and ideas, so you can sort of give some kind of common sense of balance to the fact that sometimes it doesn't seem as though these people have caught up with the rest of the world, that human life has value and we should value all human lives. But that being said, we will never shirk our responsibility to have an impact on those people so much around the world who are really on the edge between dying and living, survival and demise. And the United States will always stand in the gap on those issues.
Jeffrey, you're already shaking your head. Why?
Double talk. I mean, Armstrong and his double talk. This coming from a conservative Republican who denies climate change, one of the major problems in the world today. I mean, you know, he never listens to what I say. He has his own answers prepared as talk about sound bites. I said that the Secretary General's job is thankless. There are great programs in the UN, and Natalie can go through them. I mean, UNICEF is a fantastic one, eradicating disease around the world. They do wonderful work. But when it comes to the Secretary General, Armstrong just goes off on his own tangents and blames me for sound bites. Perhaps if it's not a thankless job, Armstrong, you can name the last 4 Secretaries General and list one accomplishment for each one. Go ahead.
Well, listen, I think Kofi Annan did a terrific job as Secretary General, especially in places that never got really the attention in some of these African countries in terms of relief and that have often been neglected.
Name one success and name the other 3.
Listen, I'm not going to get in this cat and mouse game with you. The fact is,
because you had to
rethink what you had to say in the beginning.
Anonymous, they disappear. They don't accomplish anything.
This is a conversation. There's enough conflict in the world. We don't need it among ourselves.
Okay,
let's find areas.
Let our guest Natalie say some words here. Let you come in.
I mean, if you're talking about tangible accomplishments, you look at what Ban Ki-moon has done in rallying action on climate change, in putting LGBT rights at the heart of what the UN is doing. Kofi Annan, if you want a practical example, he negotiated a great deal with big pharmaceutical companies that resulted in HIV/AIDS medicine being accessible and cheaper to millions around the world. You look at Dag Hammarskjöld, his mediation efforts. There are plenty of examples where the Secretary General can maneuver within the confines of politics. I agree, it is a thankless job. It is an impossible job, as it's been described by its incumbents, but they can make a difference. I noticed, Martin, you didn't ask me whether I was interested in running for Secretary General.
I'll do that right now, Natalie. Let's sort that out. Do you want the job?
Ask me again in 10 years' time. No, I mean, we want the best possible person for this job. We want someone who's had experience of running, you know, a big organization, who has the political skill to maneuver. We need someone who can inspire people. That's what the UN is. It's hope for millions of people.
I want to ask Natalie, in a chauvinistic world of international politics, is it possible we will one day have a woman Secretary General, or even this time?
I would love to see a woman Secretary General, but I want the best possible person for the job, regardless of gender and regardless of where they come from.
But who would be on the short list for women?
Well, I don't want to comment on candidates, but I will tell you, I think there's a good chance that there will be a woman this time. There have already been some individuals nominated by their governments, which includes, I think, 2 women to date. And the General Assembly decided and in fact encouraged states to put forward qualified women.
Who's on the short list? Name some names.
Well, there's no official shortlist yet, but individuals who have been endorsed by their government include, so for the women, Irina Bokova, she's Bulgarian, she currently heads UNESCO, Vesna Pusic, the foreign minister of Croatia, and then we have from the male candidates, we have Danilo Turk, the former president of Slovenia, Vuk Jeremic, former foreign minister of Serbia, and Srdjan Kurin, the former foreign minister of Macedonia. So all Eastern Europeans at the moment, and we hope that that will be opened out.
But listen, Armstrong, is it really appropriate we're sort of bickering about gender or trying to skew the election of the next UN Secretary-General or worrying about what gender is, when clearly there are some fundamental difficulties with the UN? I mean, the two most powerful men in the world allegedly came together this week, and they could barely have a civil word with one another.
I think it's difficult to have a civil word with a world leader when the president of the United States is standing waiting for Mr. Putin for 20 minutes. I just think it shows a lot of disrespect, and it's just to me, it was just totally out of line. I think I don't think we should overestimate Mr. Putin's role and influence that he could have in Syria. I think he's trying to take attention away from his involvement in Ukraine to change the dialogue. I think he's trying to become relevant. I think they have a lot of issues in his country that they're not willing to deal with. This economic collapse, while he still enjoys popularity, his constituency has no appetite for getting into a drawn-out conflict in Syria. And right now, Mr. Putin needs Mr. Obama, much more than Mr. Obama needs Putin. But I do think Putin is correct, and I think you're seeing the European allies support this. Trying to oust Bashar in Syria is not the solution. We tried that with Muammar Gaddafi. We tried it with in Iraq, and look at what the result has been. So I think we need to move slow on that issue. But other than that, at least they got a chance to come together and meet, and who knows what may have come out of it.
But, Jeffrey, you see, it seems to be an impotent organisation. The UN has been trying for years to sort out the Middle East amongst many other problems around the world. But on the Middle East alone, progress? Barely any?
None. None. Why? I mean, the UN does certain things really well, like UNESCO, like UNICEF. They do certain things very badly because the structures simply won't allow them to do it well. And that's the fact that you've got vetoes on the Security Council and 192 constituents who all have their own agenda. I mean, this business with Mr. Putin, it's actually very worrying what he's doing and putting troops on the ground, not necessarily fighting ISIS directly with those troops, but certainly airstrikes, and supporting the president of Syria, who is a Sunni Muslim, who has been known for his genocide of the Shiite Muslims. And when you understand that the support of that man will certainly anger the Shiites and Mr. Putin, you realize that Mr. Putin's support of the president is a completely foolhardy exercise. He will come a cropper in this one very quickly. And I think the President Obama is quite correct in saying, let's just sit by and let the man have enough rope to hang himself, and then we'll go in and save him and get rid of the president of Syria.
Natalie, do you think there's a frustration that an event like the big coming together of world leaders is sort of hijacked by their own agendas? The UN agenda of bringing a bit of peace, setting some goals, trying to fund it all, seems to get buried by the bickering between nations.
That's the reality of the UN. I think in Jeffrey's correct. It does certain things very well because it's got the political support, it's got the funding to do it. When it comes to the hard political issues, I think the best thing the UN offers is that it is a forum for states. It is a good talking shop. It often gets derided for being that, but I think it's hugely valuable. What I do think is encouraging, although I don't think we're anywhere close to a solution, is that finally it's been recognized that we need to start engaging the other countries in the region, including Iran, including Saudi Arabia. That is something that the UN has been very keen to make progress on. So at least people are talking to each other, which is, a small consolation for the millions that are suffering in Syria, but at least we've got people around the table. But I think it's the fact that big powers really control the UN's agenda. That is something we need to crack, because what we're starting to see now is the breakdown, I think, of our international system. We've got UN agencies running out of money. That's partly the reason why we're seeing the refugee flows that we are in Europe. We need to really start investing serious time and energy as well as money into making the UN system work if this long period of global peace that we have had is to last. I think that is as serious as a situation as we've had since, for the past 70 years.
Natalie Samarasinghe, thank you very much indeed. A reminder, you can catch up with the Sky News debate on Apple TV, Roku, on Catch Up, and of course at skynews.com/US. Next, the new financial year has arrived in America. As the government was heading for a complete showdown, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, paid the ultimate sacrifice and resigned. But will it be enough to avoid a messy standoff and political paralysis? Well, let's speak to a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Bush administration. Colleen Graffy knows the movements around Washington very well. What's your sense of this whole affair with various factions within Republicanism bickering in the open? Is it just going to go on forever?
Well, I think that they'll pass a stopgap measure today, but they kick it down until December. The plan is to get a 2-year package so that it takes us through the presidential elections. But the real thing is the Republican Party needs to decide whether they are a party of protest or a party in power. If they want to be in power, then they need to compromise. But many members of the Republican Party see any compromise as being equivalent to collusion, and therefore you're doing business with the enemy. John Boehner tried compromise, and we've seen what's happened to him. Whether Kevin McCarthy, who's likely to be the next Speaker of the House, is able to do that a little more subtly so that Republicans feel that he's passionately on their side, but is able to get legislation through and not let things happen like shutting down the government, which no one wants.
But Colleen, just to take your point, John Boehner tried to do some compromise. He has all this wonderful big range of opinion within the Republican Party, from the Tea Partiers on the far right and from the more moderates, and maybe even Jeb Bush, the candidate. I don't know if he represents the sort of centre ground of Republicanism. And knitting that lot together and getting them to agree on anything seems well nigh impossible right now.
Well, the majority of Americans do not want the government to shut down, and in fact, the majority of the Republicans don't want it to shut down. So when we look at the presidential candidates, Ted Cruz would probably be on that side that does not want compromise. He wants to stand his ground on this Planned Parenthood as being part of the funding. And I would put John Kasich, the governor of Ohio, as being a candidate who's seen as too much for compromise, which might cause him difficulties in winning the primary. So that leaves it with Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, both who perhaps speak to the base, but also have been able to compromise and be able to do business. So I think threading the needle is going to be this tough part. If Kevin McCarthy can be speaking to the base, but being able to reach across the aisle at the same time, then he will not have the vitriol hurled at him as John Boehner did. And one of the things that they say about McCarthy is when he enters a room, he'll say, "What do you think? What's your view?" And people like that. So it will stand him in good stead.
Let's bring in Jeffrey and Armstrong at this point. Jeffrey, apart from just sort of sitting on your laurels and laughing at all this, just fill us in, would you, on this Planned Parenthood discussion and the funding of it. Why is it such a hot topic in Washington right now?
It's a phony war. It's full of crap. The Republicans have found some worked over video that they claim is real. I mean, Carly Fiorina saying she's actually seen the video, which doesn't exist. It's one of the phony wars that the Republicans love because there are sound bites. I mean, they did it with Whitewater. They've done it with Benghazi. They're doing it now with Hillary's emails. They do it all the time. Why? Because they don't actually want to govern. And John Boehner is a victim of that. John Boehner was a gutless coward who wouldn't stand up to the Republicans, who knew better. And yet he wasted so much time and effort in the House, putting 58 votes to the floor to repeal Obamacare, knowing damn well it would never pass the Senate and Obama would veto it if it ever got that far. 58 times he wasted government money and government time to satisfy the right-wing bastards who kicked him out eventually. He's a disgrace. And I think that Paul Krugman summed it up very, very well in the Times the other day when he said Boehner is quitting because he found himself caught between the limits of political possibility and that the lives of that the Republicans lead in their own reality, the own reality of the Republicans. He said, but don't cry for John Boehner. Cry for America, because we must find a way to live with a GOP gone mad. And that's exactly the way I feel.
Well, Armstrong, you're closely involved in trying to carve out a future for a Republican candidate in the forthcoming election. You must despair at all this, don't you?
You know, listen, I think all in fairness, Planned Parenthood is a legitimate issue. The president was grilled before Congress yesterday. She was not able to answer some of the horror which was allowed by her organization to be videotaped. But I think we need to go back. I mean, many of the new members have come to the House with a mandate from their districts to burn the barn down. I mean, and not just fix it, but burn the barn down. I can understand where such cynicism comes from. I mean, it comes from an American voting public that is fed up with the go along, get along nature of politics in Washington, D.C. They feel as if their demands of government, however less government they want, the very reason they elect them, give them money, give them their tireless efforts to send them to Washington. Once they're there, it gets watered down and down amidst the harsh trading, the backdoor deal making, the backslapping that has come to characterize what many see as an entrenched Washington elite. And so they feel the only way they can be heard is to shake things up. I mean, to disrupt the business as usual, even at the cost of doing any business at all. And like my colleague just said, Boehner was such a member, and he came to the forefront as the leader to the opposition of Obamacare. But at some point, you got to compromise, you got to govern, and just because you don't get your way with Planned Parenthood doesn't mean you have to shut the government down. Okay. There's got to be other ways to compromise and find better solutions.
This seems to be getting an ongoing problem. Colleen, wind us back a few years, 8 years nearly, and candidate Obama said, we've got to fix Washington. It's dysfunctional. And here we are, nearly at the end of his second term, and it's not much better, is it?
Yeah, Obama did not want to compromise. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. Armstrong is correct. Jeffrey is wrong. The Planned Parenthood video is real. It has left everyone, Democrats and Republicans, aghast at the idea of selling fetal tissue that is against the law. And as Armstrong described, the head of Planned Parenthood did not do a very good job in explaining what's going on. And if we want to look at compromise, then what needs to take place is for Democrats and Republicans to say, this is anathema to the United States that this happens. Planned Parenthood does not need federal money. There's a way that they can be, they're basically the amount of money that they receive, the funding that they get privately is enough to sustain them. So that would be a compromise to say, let's look at what health care needs are necessary and have the government pay for that. Where it's self-sustaining for Planned Parenthood, they don't need to use federal funding. But the fact is that Republicans have 54 votes in the Senate. You need 60 in order to progress legislation. Yeah. You need 67 to overcome a veto.
So you're describing stalemate, Colleen, aren't you? And there's the problem, Jeffrey. I mean, if we expand the conversation out a bit away from just the very important but one issue of Planned Parenthood, it's a dysfunctional system. It doesn't appear to appeal to any voter to support anyone in this.
I know how to end the dysfunctional system. I know exactly how to end it. Next year in November, you vote the Republicans out. You send all the bums home. You put a Democrat House and a Democratic Senate. Things will get done. And Hillary will see that they get done. That's all. Just get rid of the bums.
Martin, can I just come in on this?
Sure.
That this is the way our system is supposed to work. That no one, there's supposed to be compromise. We're supposed to have this difference of opinion, and then we come together. That's why you have House of Representatives voted in 2 years, President 4 years, Senate 6 years, so that you don't have sort of a popular majority coming in. They're supposed to be looking at these issues and coming up with a compromise. That's not happening, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of the reason is gerrymandering, that you have both Democrats and Republicans that have all of the votes, and therefore they don't have to compromise within their district. And but I don't think we should call it stalemate. This is the way the system is supposed to work. We have differences of opinion, and we need to come together and figure them out.
That's part of the problem. Colleen, of course, was absent at 8th grade civics, just as Armstrong was. It's not about compromise, Colleen. It's about checks and balances. That's the actual term. Now, when you talk about gerrymandering, it is the most disgraceful thing, one of the most disgraceful things that this Republican Congress did. They restructured America so they could assure that blacks and old people and young people don't get the vote and that Republicans come back into Congress. I mean, this is all wrong. Now, if you restructure the country fairly, and there are ways of doing that, and you make it permanent, or you have a system where you can change it as population changes in a non-political way, well, maybe you'll get a more political response. But the part of the problem has to be the fact that you've got a Republican House that doesn't want to compromise, that has this scorched earth obstructionism plan to destroy everything, that won't listen to compromise, and simply is happy to shut the government down. And they will try it again in December. The leadership won't let them get away with it before the election. Why? Because if they shut the government down, America will throw the bums out as well they should.
Colleen, you mentioned the name of Kevin McCarthy as this likely character to emerge. Number 2 in the House right now. He may well get this job, which another one maybe nobody really wants. Can he really make a difference and reach across the aisle too?
I think he can, but just to Jeffrey's point, civics education 2.0, the results of checks and balances is compromise. So to Kevin McCarthy, what the Republicans need to do is that before they can win the vote, they need to win the argument. And I think that's what they've not been good at doing, is how do you articulate the argument, make the case to the American people so that the majority or a good proportion are supporting it. Then you can get behind getting a vote. Then you can stand your ground. The problem is that the Republicans have not done a good job of articulating and winning the argument so that when they face a showdown, when they threaten to shut down the government, people are saying that's a worthy cause, that's worth standing your ground on. But at the moment, they're not doing that. It might be that Kevin McCarthy is going to do a better job.
Colleen, thank you. Jeffrey and Armstrong as well. We're out of time, Jeffrey. Thank you very much indeed. And that's it for this edition of The Debate. You can continue watching Sky News on Apple TV, on Roku, on Catch Up, and of course at skynews.com. Until next time, goodbye.